He had a limp that never fully healed from a fence post that fell on him when he was 19. And 43 years later, he still walked like a man who had learned to make peace with the ground. That was the first thing Nettie Calloway noticed about him. Not his age, not the gray threaded through his dark hair like frost along a creek bank, not the worn leather of his boots or the particular way he held his hat in both hands when he stood. At a door, he wasn't sure he was welcome to enter. She noticed the limp, and she noticed that he didn't let it slow him down. His name was Garrett Doss. He was 52 years old. He had come to the Calloway farm in late April looking for seasonal work, carrying nothing but a canvas bag and a letter of recommendation from a man named Hendricks up in Cheyenne, whose handwriting suggested he'd written it in a hurry, or maybe in poor light. Nettie's father, Harmon Calloway, read the letter twice, folded it, and handed it back without a word. He hired Garrett the next morning. Nettie was 26. She had come back to the farm 2 years earlier after her mother passed, and she had stayed not because she had nowhere else to go. She'd had a teaching position in Billings, a small apartment with a window that faced east, a whole life she'd been building. But because Harmon Calloway, at 67 years old, was slower than he used to be and too proud to say it. So she came home, and she found that home had gotten smaller while she was gone. Or maybe she had just grown in the years away. The land was still beautiful. The work was still hard. But something in her had come untethered from it, and she hadn't found a way to tie it back down. Garrett started on the fence line. There were 40 acres of it in disrepair, posts rotted at the base, wire gone slack or snapped entirely, whole sections that had simply given up against the last winter. He worked from sunup until the light gave out. He didn't ask for instructions. He assessed what needed doing, gathered what he needed, and did it. Harmon watched him from the porch. He didn't say anything about what he saw, but he stopped watching after 3 days, which was the closest Harmon Calloway ever came to offering a compliment. Nettie watched him too, though she would not have admitted it at the time. She watched because there was something precise about the way he worked. No wasted motion, no dramatics. He would set a post, tamp it, check it, and move on. He didn't sing to himself the way some hired hands did, didn't whistle, didn't carry on. He just worked, steady as water wearing down a stone, and by the end of the second week, 30 acres of fence line looked like it had never known a hard winter at all. She brought him water one afternoon in mid-May. It was the kind of afternoon that makes you forget what cold feels like, the sky so blue it seemed almost improper, the meadow grass already knee-high and bending in long, slow waves toward the creek. She walked out to where he was working the east section, and he saw her coming and stopped and waited. "Water," she said. Not a question, not particularly warm. "Thank you," he said, and took the jar and drank half of it and handed it back. She had expected to turn around and go back to the house. Instead, she stood there. There was something she had been meaning to ask her father but hadn't. "How old did you tell him you were?" she said. Garrett looked at her with a steadiness that was not unfriendly, but was not especially welcoming either. "I didn't tell him anything," he said. "He didn't ask." "He will, probably," Garrett said. "He doesn't like surprises." "Most men who've worked the land don't," Garrett said. "Things surprise you enough out here without going looking for more." She looked at him for a moment. "How old are you?" 52, he said, without any particular feeling about it, the way you say a number when the number is just a fact. She nodded once and walked back to the house. She wasn't sure what she'd meant by asking. She told herself it was a practical question. Hired hands over 50 sometimes had health problems that slowed the work, and they were short-handed going into the haying season. That was all. She told herself that for about 3 weeks. The trouble started, as trouble often does, with a third party. A man named Whitfield Oakes had been driving his truck past the Calloway farm on Saturday mornings for the better part of a year. He was 44, owned the feed supply in town, and had made what he considered a reasonable offer for Nettie's time on at least 4 occasions, each more direct than the last. Nettie had declined each time with diminishing politeness. Whitfield had taken this to mean she was playing hard to get, because Whitfield Oakes had never seriously entertained the possibility that a woman might simply not want what he was offering. He came by on the last Saturday of May and found Nettie in the yard splitting kindling, which she did with an efficiency that made grown men nervous. Garrett was across the yard, repairing the barn door hinge, and Whitfield noticed him and filed that fact away. "New hand?" Whitfield said. "Yes," Nettie said. "Old for the work." "He's doing fine," she said, and went back to the kindling. Whitfield didn't leave. He put his foot on the fence post and looked toward the barn. "Man that age working hired labor," he said. "Probably never amounted to much." Nettie set down the hatchet. "Whitfield," she said, "I don't know why you keep coming by here." "I like the view," he said. "The view hasn't changed its mind," she said. "I'd appreciate it if you'd go on." He went, but he stopped at the barn on his way out and said something to Garrett that Nettie couldn't hear. Garrett didn't look up from the hinge. Whatever Whitfield said, it didn't reach him. Or if it did, it found nowhere to take hold. She thought about that later. About what it meant to be a man who could let a thing like that roll past without flinching and without shrinking. She had known men who puffed up at anything and men who folded at everything, and she had stopped expecting to find something in between. That evening, she found Garrett at the water trough cleaning up before supper. She had taken to leaving a plate at the bunkhouse for him most evenings. He never asked for it and never mentioned it, but the plates came back clean and left by the door, which she took as acknowledgement enough. "What did he say to you?" she asked. Garrett dried his face on the back of his wrist. "Told me I was too old to be working someone else's land and I ought to think about that. What did you say?" "Nothing," Garrett said. "Nothing? A man says something like that," Garrett said. "He's not looking for a conversation. He's trying to get a reaction. I didn't feel like giving him one." She thought about that the whole walk back to the house. June came in warm and relentless. The haying started and the days stretched out, long and brutal, 5 a.m. until the mosquitoes drove you in, and Garrett worked through all of it without complaint. His knee gave him trouble in the heat. She could see it in the way he moved by end of day, the hitch in his step a little more pronounced. But he never mentioned it, and he never slowed. One afternoon, she found him sitting in the shade of the barn eating his lunch, and there was a boy next to him. A kid from the neighboring farm, maybe 14, who'd wandered over with that aimless look boys get in summer when they have too much time and too little direction. His name was Clyde. He was trying to do some kind of baling work and making a mess of it. Garrett wasn't watching him fail. He was showing him, quietly, step by step, without making the boy feel foolish. The kid listened in the way that children only listen when they don't realize they're being taught. Nettie stood at the corner of the barn and watched and didn't announce herself. After a while, Garrett said, without looking up, "You can come out of the shade, Miss Calloway. You're not bothering us." The boy looked up, startled. Nettie walked out, and Clyde scrambled to his feet. "Sit down," Garrett said to the boy, and the boy sat back down. That evening, her father was on the porch when she came up from the barn. Harmon Calloway was 67 years old and had the face of a man who had spent most of those years outside, the lines in it less like aging and more like a map of everywhere he'd been. He didn't look at her when she came up the steps. He was looking out at the pasture. "Man knows his work," Harmon said. "He does," she said. "How old did you say he was?" "I didn't," she said. 52. Harmon was quiet for a moment. "Good age," he said. "Old enough to know what he's doing. Not so old he can't do it." She sat down next to him, and they watched the last of the evening light go off the hills. "Dad," she said. "I need to tell you something." "I know," he said. "You know?" "I know what you're going to say," he said. He rocked forward once in the chair. "And I don't have any objection. You haven't heard it yet." "Nettie," he said, "I've watched you watch that man work for 6 weeks. I'm 67, not blind." She didn't have an answer for that. "Is he a good man?" Harmon said. "I believe so," she said. "Does he know what he's worth?" "I think he does," she said. "He just doesn't make much noise about it." Harmon nodded slowly. "That's the kind," he said. "That's exactly the kind." Now, right about here, I want to step out of the story for just a moment, because this is the part of the telling where I always find myself wondering about the people on the other side. You, sitting wherever you are, listening to this. If you're hearing this from somewhere in the United States, or Canada, or Australia, or anywhere else in this wide world, I'd love to know. Drop your state or your country in the comments below. And if this story is touching something in you, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to Prairie Hearts so you don't miss what comes next. Now, back to Garrett Doss and Nettie Calloway. She found the box in late July. She hadn't been looking for anything. She was bringing a spare lantern to the bunkhouse. One of the wall hooks had given out, and she knocked over a wooden crate that Garrett kept by his cot, and the lid came open and a tin box slid out. She put the lid back on. She set the box on the cot. She hung the lantern, and then she left. She told herself she hadn't seen anything, but she had seen enough to recognize what was in that box. She couldn't have said what exactly. A few folded papers, the edge of a photograph, something wrapped in cloth. But the care with which those things had been placed, the neatness of it, told her that whatever was in that box was what Garrett Doss had carried through his whole life. Everything that mattered, in a space the size of a boot. She asked him about it that evening. She hadn't planned to. It just came out while they were standing at the fence looking at the horses coming in from the west pasture. "The box by your cot," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He watched a sorrel mare come up slow toward the gate. "You saw it," he said. It wasn't an accusation. "The crate tipped," she said. "I didn't open it." "I know," he said, a long pause. The sorrel mare reached the gate and stood there waiting. "I was married," he said, "long time ago. She passed when she was 31. We didn't have children." He said it the way you say something you've said so many times to yourself that the words have gone smooth, like river stones, not without feeling, but without raw edges anymore. "I kept some things. Letters," she wrote. A picture. A small carved bird her father made. "I'm sorry," Nettie said. "I am too," he said. "For a long while I was more than sorry, but you can't carry grief at full weight forever. You'd never be able to carry anything else." She looked at him. "That's not a criticism," he said quickly, "of people who carry it a long time. Lord knows it doesn't leave on any schedule you set for it." "No," she said, "it doesn't." Her mother had been gone 2 years, and some mornings it still came at her sideways, that absence, from directions she didn't expect. "Garrett," she said. "Yes, I don't know what you think about." She stopped, started again. "I don't know what you think is possible here. I'm not saying it right." "You're saying it fine," he said. "I'm 26, she said. "You're 52. "I know that," he said. "Some people would say that's. I know what some people would say," he said. "I've thought about it considerably. The gap in years is real. I'm not dismissing it." He paused. "But I've also learned that a person can spend a great deal of time measuring things that don't end up mattering the way you thought, and very little time paying attention to the things that do." The sorrel mare leaned her head over the gatepost and waited. "I'm not asking you for anything," Garrett said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not a man who would put you in an uncomfortable position. If you'd prefer I keep the distance I've been keeping, I can do that." "I don't prefer that," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. He opened the gate for the mare. What happened over the next 2 months was not dramatic in the way that stories sometimes make these things. There was no grand gesture, no moment that could be pointed to on a calendar. There was simply the accumulation of days, each one carrying a little more of the weight of what was between them. Garrett was 52 years old, and he had been alone for a long time, and he knew the difference between being content in solitude and being genuinely at peace with it. He had been content. He had not always been at peace. Nettie was 26, and she had been capable her whole life, and she had confused capability with not needing. The farm ran because she ran it. Her father was steadier because she was there. She had learned to fill every gap around her, and somewhere in all of that filling, she had stopped noticing the gap inside herself. Harmon Calloway watched all of this with the patience of a man who has spent 40 years reading weather coming in from the west. He didn't interfere. He didn't comment. He made Garrett a plate on Sunday evenings and invited him up to the house to eat it, which was a form of declaration he would never have put into words. The thing that finally made everything plain happened on a Tuesday in September, a cool morning with the first real suggestion of fall in the air. Nettie came out at 6 to find Garrett sitting on the porch steps, which was unusual. He was usually at work before she came out. He had something in his hands, one of the letters from the tin box. She recognized the age of the paper, the careful fold of it. He looked up when she came out. "I want to show you something," he said. "If you're willing." She sat down next to him on the steps, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. He unfolded the letter. His wife's handwriting was small and looping, the kind of handwriting that takes its time. He didn't read it aloud. He just held it so she could see it. "She wrote me this the winter before she passed," he said, "when she already knew she was sick, though we didn't say so out loud to each other yet." He was quiet for a moment. "She said she hoped I would find my way back to things eventually, that she'd always thought I had more to give than I'd ever had room to give it." He refolded the letter along its original creases. I put that letter in the box, and I didn't take it out for 20 years. Nettie didn't speak. "I took it out last week," he said. She understood what he meant. She understood what it had taken to take it out. "Garrett," she said. "Yes, I think you ought to talk to my father." He looked at her. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not nervousness exactly, but a kind of careful attention, the way a man looks when he understands the stakes and is not pretending otherwise. "You think I think he already has," she said. Garrett Doss walked up to Harmon Calloway on a Thursday afternoon. Harmon was mending a piece of harness on the porch, his glasses down on his nose, his hands moving with the automatic competence of a man who has done a thing 10,000 times. He was 67 years old, and his hands still worked better than his eyes, and he didn't look up when Garrett came up the steps. Garrett stood. He held his hat in both hands, the same way he'd held it the first day he came to the farm. "Mr. Calloway," he said. "Garrett," Harmon said, without stopping. "Sir, I'd like to speak plainly with you." Harmon set the harness down in his lap and looked up over his glasses. He studied Garrett Doss for a long moment. This man, who was 52 years old and had walked to his door in April with nothing but a worn canvas bag and a hastily written letter, and had proceeded to put 40 acres of fence line back in order and make his daughter smile for the first time since her mother passed, and teach a neighbor's boy how to bale hay, and sit quiet and not fill every silence with noise. "I figure I know what you're going to say," Harmon said. "Yes, sir," Garrett said. "I imagine you do, and I imagine you know," Harmon said, "that I'm not the kind of man who makes decisions based on how much a man has in his pocket." "I do know that," Garrett said. "I don't have much to offer her in terms of—" "Stop!" Harmon said, not unkindly. He picked up the harness again. "You want to talk to me about what you have? All right, you got up every morning at 5 without being asked. You fixed what was broken, and you didn't make a show of it. You taught that Clyde boy to work a baler when you had no reason to stop and do that. You let Whitfield Oakes talk at you, and you didn't give him the satisfaction of a single word back." He worked the needle through the leather. "And you sat on my porch this past Sunday and told me that story about the Hendricks Ranch up in Cheyenne, and you made me laugh for the first time in I don't know how long." He tied off the stitch. "My daughter is 26 years old and you're 52, Harmon said. "That's a real distance, and I won't pretend it isn't. There will be years ahead that carry weight from that gap." "I want you to know I see it." "I see it too," Garrett said. "I've thought about it more than you know." "I believe you," Harmon said. He set the harness on the rail. He took off his glasses and looked at Garrett straight. "Here's what I think matters. I think a man's character is what you can read in the small things, not the grand ones. And I've had 6 months of small things to read." He stood up. He was not as tall as he used to be. He had given back maybe an inch to the years. But he was still a solid man, still someone you felt when he was standing in front of you. "She's not young and foolish," Harmon said. "She's young and clear-eyed, which is a different thing altogether. You treat her like that, like a woman who sees clearly, and I don't have a single objection." He put out his hand. Garrett shook it. "One thing," Harmon said. "Yes, sir. You ever let her carry something you ought to be carrying yourself?" Harmon said. "You answer to me. I don't care how old I am. Understood?" Garrett said. Harmon nodded. He picked up his harness and went back to his chair and put his glasses back on. Garrett stood there for a moment. Then he put his hat back on and walked back down the steps. They were married the following spring. It was a small wedding. Harmon, a handful of neighbors, the pastor from the church in town, and Clyde, who showed up in a shirt that was too small for him and stood very straight, which was the most formal he'd ever been. Garrett Doss was 53 by then. Nettie was still 26 for another 3 weeks. People counted the years between them because people do that. Some of them said what they thought out loud, and some of them said it where they thought no one could hear, and Nettie heard some of it, and Garrett heard more of it than he let on. But here is what the counting never captured. He knew how to be still when she needed stillness. She knew how to move when he needed motion. He had learned, in his 52 years, how to stop trying to fix things that weren't broken and start tending things that were. She had learned, in her 26 years, that capability without vulnerability is just a wall you live inside. Together, they were something that didn't fit into the arithmetic people kept trying to do. The farm did well that year. The fence line held through the winter. Harmon Calloway, 68 years old, went out on a Tuesday morning in November to check on a section of the south pasture, and when he came back he was in better spirits than anyone had seen him in years. And he said nothing about why, which was typical of him and was its own kind of answer. Nettie found, in the spring, that she had stopped calculating how much was left to do and started noticing what was already there. The meadow grass coming back. The horses moving slow and easy in the morning light. The coffee hot on the stove when she came down at 6, because Garrett was always up before her and always had the coffee made. Small things. The small things. And that, friends, is where I'll let this story rest. I've been telling stories from the prairie for a long time now. Long enough to know that the ones that stay with you are never the ones about wealth or power, or any of the things the world says you're supposed to want. The ones that stay are the ones about a man who shows up, does the work, holds his hat in both hands at a door he's not sure he's welcome at, and keeps showing up anyway. Garrett Doss was 52 years old when he came to the Calloway farm. He had a limp and a canvas bag and a letter written in poor light. He had no land, no savings to speak of, no particular standing in any town. What he had was character, and character, real character, the kind that shows up in the small things before it ever shows up in the grand ones. Well, that doesn't have an age. Wherever you are today, I hope you carry a little of this story with you. I hope when the world tries to measure you by what you don't have, you remember what you do have. And I hope the people in your life are paying attention to the right things. God bless every one of you. This is Prairie Hearts. Keep riding.